Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents 3 Oaths, a Daidoji Shin mystery, by Josh Reynolds, narrated by Kaipo Schwab. This title from Aconite Books is also available as a trade paperback and ebook, and can be found wherever fine books are sold. Chapter 1. Golden Frog Dojo. Daidoji Shin sighed and snapped open his fan. The humidity was stultifying this late in the day, and the smell of the river was pervasive. The heat made it worse. Everything on this side of the river stank of fish and mud. Shin was slim, handsome, and white-haired, the epitome of a crane courtier in his finest azure robes. Silk, of course. It made the heat bearable, if only just. His bench creaked beneath him as he tried to find a more comfortable sitting position. Around him, the small crowd gave a subdued cheer as 2 new contestants entered the sumai circle and fell into the traditional preparatory squat. The circle, made from partially buried rice straw bales, sat in front of the dojo proper at the center of the proving ground. The circle was surrounded by students acting as attendants and sumai wrestlers sitting on stools, awaiting their turn. Hard wooden benches had been arranged at irregular intervals around the circle, for the exclusive use of the few observers present. Normally, the crowd for a sumai tournament was quite substantial. In this case, however, the tournament was an informal one, and attendance was by special invitation only. As such, the audience was small, barely 30 people in total, counting Shin. Most of them were local merchants, but there were a few higher-ranking individuals scattered throughout. Their servants and bodyguards lounged behind the benches or stood off to the side, talking quietly amongst themselves. Inside the circle, 2 large individuals met with a slap of flesh and a crash of bone. Shin winced at the impact. Sumai was, at its heart, a duel of skill and strength, flesh against flesh, rather than steel against steel. He gave his fan a forceful flutter, causing the metal tines to rattle. It did little to help, and he folded it shut with another sigh. "Any sign of her?" he murmured to his companion. Hiramori Kasami grunted. "No." She stood at attention beside his seat, her arms crossed over her chest. She'd foregone full armor, under protest, and wore only robes emblazoned with a Daidoji sigil. But she'd brought her weapons, obviously. Few things short of the kami themselves could part Kasami from the tools of her trade. A child of the Uebe marshes, she'd been born a vassal of the Daidoji, and trained to serve them in all things. At the moment, that service consisted solely of keeping Shin from suffering the consequences of his own actions. It was not a service she particularly enjoyed, as she was often at pains to remind him, but she performed it admirably. She grunted again and shifted her weight slightly. "We should leave." "That would be rude, after all the trouble Lady Minami went to in order to invite me." Lady Akodo Minami was the current commander of the lion garrison that controlled 1/3 of the city of the Rich Frog. The note she'd sent had been written in a battlefield cipher commonly used by the Akodo. He felt a flutter of satisfaction as he thought of it. Minami had obviously assumed he was clever enough to decipher her message. She was definitely thawing toward him. "It might be an ambush," Kasami said, watching the match. Shin couldn't tell whether she was enjoying herself, but given that it involved violence, he suspected she was. "Yes, the lion are traditionally known for their ambushes." "They are soldiers," Kasami said, glancing at him. "Soldiers do what they must." "Yes, and as Lady Minami is a soldier, she must have a very good reason for inviting me to this gathering." He tapped his robes, where the folded note lay concealed. "I don't know about you, but I'm very curious to find out what it is." "It will mean trouble," Kasami persisted stubbornly. "Quite possibly. But things were getting a trifle boring, don't you think?" "No." Kasami paused. "Boring is good." "So you do agree," Shin said, smiling slightly. Kasami growled wordlessly and looked away. Shin let his smile fade. Scoring points against Kasami was of limited entertainment value these days, especially when she was right. It might well be an ambush, a clever ruse devised by an unknown foe to draw him out. It was an invigorating thought. He'd never imagined he might have enemies one day. Angry husbands, yes. Angry wives, also yes. But real enemies? He shivered slightly, delighted. His grandfather had a saying, "A man measures his worth in the curses of his enemies." If so, Shin's worth had increased quite a lot in recent days. Of late, he'd begun to make a name for himself as a solver of puzzles, discreet or otherwise. Thefts, disappearances, even the odd murder. That sort of thing got around. People talked. Other people listened. Then they came to him. It was to be expected. A wiser man would have stopped. But Shin had come to realize that he quite enjoyed investigating the conundrums that crossed his path. They provided him with an outlet, a way of using his mind for something other than the tedious travails of a courtier's life. The mysteries he investigated had become his whetstone for the sharpening of his wits, much as dojos like this one were for the sharpening of a warrior's skills. There were quite a few dojos in the city. He knew only a few of them by name. Rich Frog Dojo, located on the eastern bank of the river in the Lion District, was the best-known dojo in the city, with an emphasis on the martial teachings of Ikoma. There was also the Silk Frog Dojo, run by the Badger clan, which sat in the Lion District as well. This one, the Golden Frog, so named because of the gold paint that covered the gates and roof of the dojo, occupied an innocuous side street near the Unicorn District. Despite that, it wasn't run by the Unicorn, but the Kairu Ronin clan. The Kairu technically owed no allegiance to anyone save the imperial Mia family, and that only because the Mia were willing to pay the Kairu's, quite frankly, exorbitant asking price. Given the city's tripartite nature, ostensibly split between the Unicorn, the Lion, and the Dragon, the Kairu's position as enforcers of the imperial will made them all the stronger. The other clans jockeyed for the favor of the Ronin in a variety of matters, everything from shipping schedules to warehouse expansion. The Kaido, for their part, were careful not to abuse this privilege overmuch. Shin found them a pragmatic bunch on the whole. By and large, they were mainly interested in maintaining the status quo and keeping the port open for trade, which suited both he and the Daidoji Trading Council just fine. He couldn't help but wonder why Minami had chosen this dojo for their meeting, rather than one in the Lion District. Was she trying to avoid prying eyes? If so, why meet in the open at all? The more he thought about it, the more curious he became. Whatever Minami's reasons, they were bound to be interesting, if nothing else. A bead of sweat rolled down beneath the collar of his robe. He snapped his fan open again as one of the contestants stumbled from the circle in a most ungraceful fashion. The winner raised his arms in victory, and Shin applauded politely. "Luck," Kasami muttered. Shin glanced at her. Was it? Obviously. His opponent slipped. They were evenly matched until then. She sneered. "As I said, luck." "But is luck not a part of any fight?" A rough voice interjected. Kasami stiffened, her expression turning sour. Shin turned to see a louche, Ujik, dressed in rough dark robes bearing the insignia of the Badger, standing nearby. The man's hair was bound up in an informal topknot, and he was unshaven. Like Kasami, he was armed, albeit with one of the curved blades favored by the steppe riders. "Then," he continued, "I am but a simple nomad, and see these things differently than civilized persons." The nomad smiled and sketched a bow, just shy of disrespectful, in Shin's direction. "Lord Shin, Gota bid me bring you his greetings. So, greetings. Hello, Arban. As always, it is a delight to see you. Shin gave his fan a desultory twitch, warding off the smell of milk and meat that emanated from the ujik. He half suspected that Arban bathed in horse milk, if he bothered to bathe at all. He rose from his bench, searching for the ujik's master, and caught sight of the broad, sturdy form of Ichiro Gota, standing near the ring. Gota caught Shin's gaze and waved a weighty paw in invitation. Shin returned the gesture with his fan and looked at Kasami. Gota looks like he wants to chat. Keep your eyes peeled for our tardy lioness while I go be social. Arban looked at Kasami, who was doing her best to ignore him. Don't worry. I'll keep her company. Kasami pointed to the other side of the bench without looking at the nomad. Go sit over there and don't talk to me. Arban grinned and sat in Shin's vacated spot. Here'll do me. Thank you. Shin left them to it and ambled toward Gota. The badger was easily upset, and if he'd gone to the trouble of making an official greeting, he might take offense if Shin chose not to reciprocate. As he walked, his eyes strayed to the circle and the match taking place. Once, his first impulse would have been to see if there were any wagers going. These days, the urge was still there, but not the boredom that had been its impetus. He had new vices to indulge in. What were games of chance next to the risk of running a theater? What was reading the faces of your opponents next to matching wits with thieves and murderers? I thought that was you, Gota, Shin said as he joined the badger. You look well. Thinking of becoming a patron of one of the local stables, Crane? Gota rumbled without preamble. The badger's stubborn refusal to bend to propriety was one of the reasons Shin liked him. Gods know some of them need it. Between them, the lion and the unicorn gobble up all the decent wrestlers in the city. A nearby wrestler grunted at this, and Gota gave him a friendly thump on the shoulder. No offense. It's a tempting thought, but I'm afraid my plate is rather full these days, what with the theater and all. Shin knew that while most sumai stables were attached to a dojo, they were expensive to maintain, even for dojos with clan backing. Private patrons were necessary to keeping a stable well-fed and fit for action. Gota waved this aside. Nonsense! It's not like you have to do anything, really. Just provide a bit of money and we both know you have plenty of that. The badger paused. That said, I am hearing stories that a certain auditor is still prowling about. Shin frowned. Lord Kenzo, you mean? Junichi Kenzo was ostensibly an auditor sent by the Daidoji Trading Council to inspect his finances. He was also a spy, looking to report on any shameful activity on Shin's part, presumably to the council, though Shin had a suspicion that the auditor was reporting to his grandfather as well. Shin had managed to distract Kenzo for a time by unleashing him on the Foxfire Theater's account books, which had been in a less than optimal state when he'd purchased the business. But that hadn't occupied him for long. That's the bird, Gota said. When you say prowling about, what do you mean exactly? Shin asked. That Kenzo was still here, months after the fact, was somewhat alarming, and he was doing his best not to think about it. If he just ignored the man, the whole mess might blow over. Unless it didn't, in which case he was definitely going to be in trouble. Gota sniffed. Word is, he's been talking to anyone and everyone who's had any sort of financial dealings with you, threatening them with repercussions from that blasted trading council of yours if they refuse to discuss matters with him. He eyed Shin with amused suspicion. Any idea why that might be? No, though rest assured I will certainly ask him next time I see him. Gota chuckled and thumped him on the back. Say no more, Crane. I'm a merchant myself. I know how these things go. You'll get no judgment from me. Shin cleared his throat. Yes, well, are you here acting as a patron? He asked, quickly changing the subject. Or you were a wrestler in your youth, as I recall, planning a return to the circle? Gota laughed harshly and slapped his ample stomach. It sounded like a drum. No, my best years are behind me. I'm here for my niece. He indicated a young woman sitting nearby, her full concentration directed toward the match taking place. She was tall and broad, built for battle or the Sumai circle. Fudo Heshu Reo. Trained her myself. Got a grip like iron and better balance than a cat. She'll go far if she gets the opportunity. Fudo Heshu, Shin repeated. Brewers, aren't they? Gota glanced at him. Yes, though most don't know that. Shin smiled. What he meant was that most didn't know the badger had more than one family. Well, she looks quite imposing, if I do say so. Ah! He paused as he caught sight of Kasami signaling him. My apologies, Gota, but I've just remembered why I'm here. Tell your niece I wish her luck. He strode away quickly, and, following his bodyguard's gestures, saw Lady Minami walking across the proving ground toward the benches, trailed as ever by her own bodyguard, Yoku. Shin hurried to intercept her. Lady Minami, you do me a great honor by inviting me here, he called out, even as Yoku stepped between them. Lord Shin, Minami replied in strained greeting. You came. I did. How could I not? He sketched a low bow, deeper than was strictly warranted, and highly visible given their surroundings. Minami gestured sharply. Stop it, Shin, she hissed. I am trying to be subtle. She gestured to a nearby bench, and he followed her over. In the circle, two wrestlers strained against one another. And failing miserably, he said cheerfully as they sat, but do not let it worry you unduly. We all have our weaknesses. Oh, look! That fellow has fallen out of the circle. How embarrassing for him. He paused as a thought occurred to him. You used my name. No honorific. I did, Minami admitted. She grimaced and looked away. We know each other well enough now, I suppose, that titles are simply a conversational encumbrance. Shin studied her for a moment, bemused. Are you saying we're friends? No. Then we're not friends? No, Minami repeated. A gong sounded, signaling the beginning of a new match. No, we're not, or... he continued in a teasing tone. Minami glared at him. Shin looked away, snapping open his fan. In the circle, the two wrestlers moved toward one another warily. Never mind, he said. Why sully what we have by defining it? I am starting to regret inviting you. Speaking of which, why did you? Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Kasami take up a position nearby. Yoku shadowed her. The two bodyguards glared at one another. No love lost there, he knew. Minami was silent for a moment. Then, what are your thoughts on marriage, Shin? Shin affected a look of sadness. We would be very unhappy, I fear. Minami pinched the bridge of her nose. No doubt, she said in a frosty tone. Shin pretended not to notice. Forgive me, but it is something of an odd question. Perhaps if you came to the point. I have a problem. Shin smiled at her. There now. Was that so hard? Minami looked at him. You are not making this easy, Shin. You're the one avoiding the subject, Shin countered. Conversations with Minami were, at times, akin to a sparring match. Whose marriage are you talking about? Not yours, I think. Certainly not mine. Unless you know something I don't. So, whose? Minami sighed. My cousin's. Shin frowned. There'd been some gossip of late about a wedding in the Lion Quarter, but he'd paid it little attention, given that it wasn't likely that he would be invited. Your cousin? That would be Akodo Moriko, yes? Yes. Shin hesitated, attempting to recall what he'd heard about the matter. Something about a delay due to the indisposition of the groom, one Itagawa Mosu. No, not indisposition. Death. He looked at Minami. I'd heard there was some difficulty with the groom. Something about a shipwreck, I believe? Pirates, she said. Or so he claims. He's alive? So he claims, she repeated. Shin peered at her. Either he is or is not. That is the problem, Minami said softly. We do not know which it is. Chapter 2. Dead Man. Shin stared at Minami. How can there be any question as to such a thing? He asked after a moment. You've met him before, presumably. Yes, once, she said, as if admitting to a breach of propriety. A most unpleasant evening for all concerned. She hesitated. I came close to killing him. Shin blinked at the bluntness of the admission. Minami wasn't prone to hyperbole. If she claimed she had been close to murder, then her intended victim was very lucky to still be breathing. I won't ask why you didn't, as it is obvious. But if you've met this Mosu, wasn't it? Itagawa Mosu? At her nod, he continued. If you've met him and been driven almost to murder by him, how can you be uncertain as to his identity now? Minami hesitated. Then, his face. It's impossible to recognize him. He claims to have been badly injured during his captivity. His family swear it is him, and my family are eager to believe them. But if we cannot identify him, if there is no proof beyond his word. She bowed her head and gripped her knees. I must be certain. Shin felt a twinge of pity. Minami was not built for uncertainty. Much like Kasami, she looked at the world through a warrior's eyes. He cleared his throat. And why do you doubt him? Has he said or done something to arouse concern? No, Minami admitted. He has been beyond reproach in all things. Then why suspect him? Because he has been beyond reproach. Before his disappearance, he was a worm, a galling, insufferable creature, always complaining, always pouting, obnoxious. Shin was momentarily taken aback by the vehemence of her tone. Like me, you mean? He asked. Minami blinked and looked at him. No, she said after a moment. No, Shin. You are obnoxious, yes, but you are not a worm. She gave a brief smile. I rather fancy you would have made a quick meal of him then, after the fashion of a crane. You would have counted him among your favored prey. Shin grasped her meaning immediately. He's a courtier, then. That explained some of her dislike. Courtiers were not well respected among the lion. They were regarded as a distasteful necessity rather than a useful tool in the clan arsenal. Do the lion even have those? He asked in a teasing tone. I thought you people only went to court under protest. Minami sniffed. We are as cultured as any great clan, Shin. That we do not flaunt that culture is no reason to doubt its existence. She frowned. He was a bad match, but both families approved nonetheless. They thought Moriko, my cousin, could temper him, as befitting in Akodo. Change him for the better, Shin supplied. Minami nodded. Was she up to the challenge? He asked. Another hesitation, a telling one. It wasn't often he saw Minami uncertain. Normally she was sure-footed, even when making the wrong moves. But she was clearly on unfamiliar ground here. It was no wonder she'd contacted him. She was willing to try, Minami said. It was her duty as a daughter of the Akodo. Shin snapped open his fan and gave it a flutter. And now? Is she still willing to try? Minami looked at him. Why would she not be? Feelings change. People change. For instance, according to you, captivity has done wonders for the would-be groom's personality. Minami grunted. No, she is overjoyed to see him. More so, in fact, than she was when they were first introduced. Oh? As I said, he is different, respectful, mild of voice and bearing, courteous even. She shook her head. If the Itagawa hadn't spoken for him, I would have sworn it was a different man. Have you mentioned these doubts to anyone else? She looked away. Shin sighed. Of course. Silly of me to ask. I take it that your suspicions were not welcomed. The Itagawa were insulted. They claimed I was trying to prevent the marriage. So you decided to come to me instead. A neutral party. A sensible strategy, and an interesting puzzle. The gong sounded again, signaling a new match, and startling him in the process. He saw that one of the contestants was Gota's niece, Reo. The other was a heavy-set young man wearing golden frog colors. Both he and Minami paused to watch as the contestants made ready, Minami with evident interest. Shin studied her from behind his fan, watching her lips part, the slight intake of breath, the widening of the eyes, all familiar signs to a trained observer. He followed her gaze and saw that it was fixed on Reo. That was interesting. He cleared his throat. The reason for your invitation has become clear. Minami didn't reply, seemingly entranced as the young woman rolled her shoulders and cracked her neck before falling into the traditional squat. Shin coughed. Minami appeared to have forgotten his presence entirely. He prodded her with his fan, causing her to jump. What? She snapped guiltily. Friend of yours? He teased, indicating Reo. Minami flushed. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course, how silly of me. Never mind. He fluttered his fan and studied her over its top. What exactly do you want of me? You like mysteries, Minami said. This is a mystery. Solve it. Her eyes strayed again to the circle where the young woman had begun to once more shove her opponent toward the edge of the circle. Unlike the fellow she was grappling with, her face showed little sign of strain or tension. It was as if she were shoving a bale of hay rather than a living, struggling wrestler. And why should I do that? Shin asked lazily, carefully. There had to be a reason Minami wanted him involved, besides the obvious, and he wanted to know what it was before he made any promises. Because I am asking you to, she said. The words sounded as if they pained her. Shin was silent for a moment, considering. She hadn't answered his question, but they could come back to that. Very well. Answer some questions, if you would. Minami gestured impatiently for him to continue. Ask, she said, her eyes on the circle once more. Reo had nearly forced her opponent all the way to the edge. He watched them push against one another for a moment before turning back to Minami. First, some context. This marriage, presumably it was meant to strengthen familial bonds between the Akodo and the Itagawa. Yes, Minami said, tearing her gaze from the circle with visible reluctance. A daughter of our family was to be married to a son of theirs. Shin nodded. Such marriages were common among the clans. Families like the Itagawa might be vassals, but they had certain rights and privileges which must be upheld. One of those rights was to a dynastic marriage. From the perspective of the Akodo, or any of the great families, such an arrangement only made sense. The more blood ties there were between vassal and lord, the harder it would be for a rift to develop between the two families. You said was, Shin pointed out. The marriage was called off, then? In all but name, Minami said. Her eyes strayed to the circle once again. When word reached us last year about the attack on the vessel Mosu was traveling aboard, many gave him up for dead. Were
Sample complete. Ready to continue?